One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
We are happy to have you as the audience for this one and also for many others that we've done before. Tune in and share with your friends, family, network, because we believe that this is something that people should listen to. James, welcome to One Step Ahead Radio one more time.
With you again, another packed week. I'm ready to digest and distill what people need to have on their radar if they need to stay one step ahead. So it's good to always have this little update with you every week. So keeps us on our toes and say, okay, well, what's new this week? What do we need to have on our list and our radar, and make sure that we've got ourselves up to date. So yeah, it's a good routine. I hope it's a good.
I think it is it's very good routine, and it's also keep us focused on what really matters, and that is what matters are people making differences around the world in one way or another. So if we start from the last week, everybody knows there has been a Davos week, and the Davos is known as the place where people gather. You know, there are different definitions of who these people are. Some will call them elite, some will call them just people that want to make a difference in the world that is continuously changing. And there have been some interesting stuff coming out of Davos last week, both in terms of, response to what is going on in the US, in terms of the elections and what is next to happen. Much talk about backlash on sustainability, but also some positive things and also some resistance, clearly indicating that our companies out there and the CEOs that want to make and continue making difference, which they are already doing today. James, any views, comments from your side on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very pleased you picked up on that as well, because like Davos is starting to become a parody of itself, right? It's become such a kind of ritual, and everyone's got their sort of their show to put on, and their CEO to speak, and world leaders, and some of the set pieces that come out. There's always the annual risk report, and Edelman does its trust barometer, and they just seem rather kind of always slightly behind the curve, right? So they always sort of, remember a few years ago, they suddenly said, well, environment and climate's, finally getting on the sea. And it's like, well, okay, finally. And it just seems rather a bit, a little bit old by the time it's published, these kind of surveys of what CEOs think is going to be important going forward. And it's kind of, we kind of worked that out already.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting, as you said, was like this, some of the corporates standing up and sort of pushing back on this sort of anti-sustainability narrative that's been really grabbing the headlines in the last few weeks, above all coming out of the US. So I was, to a certain extent, I listened to the Al Gore presentation, which was really interesting. About climate tech and analyzing, but you kind of expect it to a certain extent from Al Gore. I was very pleased, sort of hear the comments about how climate action connects to business value coming from the CEO of Inca Group, which is, we think of as IKEA, but it's the group that kind of controls the brand of IKEA.
It's a holding entity, yes.
That's right. And he says, the leading companies of the world are going through a couple of transformations, the tech transformation and the climate transformation. The train has left the station, the benefits are clear. And, they were kind of standing up in various, if you read those kind of comments, the way CEOs were talking about the business sense and the unstoppability of their attention to climate. And he was very clear about saying, since we made these commitments, how our business has flourished, and we're going to continue that, which I think is interesting in the way sustainability is now being connected more to kind of business value, economic opportunity, and that kind of narrative coming back. So I'm sure that's something that kind of pleases you, and is a good direction that we need to go into.
Yeah, it's actually trying to drill down on where the true value is. I mean, many people are talking about net zero. The question is, what is the real zero? So what is the real zero of the business in terms of how it can develop products and services? And I've been talking about this for years. I'm happy to see the move in this direction. company focusing on the value proposition where it actually matters. But in terms of Davos, I mean, can you see, I mean, these examples were really, really good, but I mean, there is like a wet blanket over Davos in relation to Trump, and also in relation to decision that he's withdrawing from Paris Climate Agreement. What do you think, from your sort of vantage point, will this have any kind of a huge impact? Because most of the businesses have already started the process, so there is no way of reversing this back.
Yeah, I think it's not, Davos is not so much about the business decisions, but the narrative that you present around them. So I think a lot of people in the sustainability community, it's a bit like in a boxing match, and you've been punched in the face a few times in the last few weeks, and you're kind of reeling a bit, and you're kind of grabbing onto the rail, onto the side of the ring, and I think what we're starting to see is kind of like those, what it means to make the case again, or to find a sort of a new narrative without sort of relying on what's now highly criticized, So something that talks the same talk in terms of growth, economic value, competitiveness, business value. I've noticed, obviously being British, the UK government now, after again being beaten around the head for the last few weeks, talking about investing in growth and infrastructure, and needing to make those difficult choices, which is unusual because they've really pivoted into that direction. So I think it's a lot of people who in the last few weeks I've seen and been in touch with sort of in the sustainability community saying, well, okay, what how do we react to where things are going? I think it's given some clues. I really liked this comments from CEOs like the head of Cisco, Chuck Robbins, who talks about D&I, again, and another beating ball of the American election, and subsequently, who says, if I'm sitting in a room to try and solve a complex problem or chase a big opportunity, I want a lot of diverse brains in that room, and I don't care if it's gender, nationality, or just diversity of experience. And again, other CEOs talking about how close they are to the diversity of their customers and their clients. So again, thinking again about the business value, the importance of being aligned with your customers, being close to your customers, kind of underpinning those things rather than saying, oh, we're doing it, just to be good to the world or sort of do good. So that kind of story is kind of interesting, I think.
But James, I mean, looking at what you're saying, I mean, there are repercussions and there are consequences for European Union in relation to what's going on in the US, especially. I mean, it has been addressed in Davos too, which is related that industry and EU member states are urging Commission basically to win back sustainability rules. Is related to CSRD. We touched upon it earlier. Do you think, I mean, what's important of that? What is important of EU to sort of stick to what it has decided before? I think it's a pivotal moment for EU to actually stand up for the values that will support the companies, but also the competitiveness of the European Union going forward.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, very key. I mean, we haven't had major updates significantly on that front this week. Everyone's waiting to hear February for the famous omnibus, package of in terms of competitiveness and cutting red tape, and how that balances with the whole drive and the whole EU attention sort of to those core values and to the environmental and the climate position that it's taken in the last few years. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and how it's argued, and also it's going to be another power struggle, obviously politically. So I think business is kind of caught a little bit in these crosswinds at the moment, and there are some people who still say sort of like you're never really going to change business until you regulate business. But this great phrase, I don't know how many times I've heard it this week or in the last few days about AI. They say America innovates, China replicates, and Europe regulates, and that last one really sticks home. again, we're talking about boxing, and it's a real sucker punch to Brussels, of saying that's, you know, how you're perceived and how you're seen in the world. So I don't know
But
whether
on
you.
the other hand, no, I look, I agree with you on that one, but I still think that in order to sustain the transition in a just way, if we talk about just transition, regulation is one of the tools we can use, and I think European Union has been on the forefront in relation to this, and maybe to some extent, sometimes over bureaucratic. I'm not sure that's true, but if you have the countries like China and US who are not really regulating anything and just running the show how they did before, it's not competing in the same sort of a space. So I think that will probably be something that European Union will definitely need to have a look at going forward, and make that reversal sort of a move to get regulation to actually support businesses going forward, which I think in a sense they already do. But let's see what happens in that space. I mean, there is an update on global banks,
Okay.
and this is a big one because it's done by Bloomberg Neff, which is a very respected player in this area. And what they did is that they look at the way how global banks are financing low carbon energy, and basically the key number remains far below net zero emissions goal of 4 to 1. Right now, the numbers are much, much lower. So the question is, what are the global banks? What do you think is the reason? Is it because they truly because many of them are actually committed to this. They have net zero targets and all of these other things. The question is, why are they doing this? Why is it the fact that they are not financing what they say that they will finance? That's of course not easy to answer, but one of the questions we can at least try to capture before we end this session. James.
Well, I'm going to punch that right back at you and ask you for your opinion on it. I mean, it's kind of, I imagine it's a lot of near-term cost and adjustment and getting out of business as usual compared to, you know, the long-term frame. I mean, it's the frog boiling in the water as ever, and it's disruptive to business practices, and obviously, you know, it takes a lot of adjustment and a lot of changes and also competition, you know, with sort of big infrastructure projects in emerging markets. If you don't finance them for one reason or another, someone else you're going to step in and finance them anyway. And so you're kind of faced with those sort of trade-offs. But I was curious to hear your sort of take on where you think it can go, or what are the kind of dynamics behind that transformation.
Of course, there are many different things involved in this: incentive models, the way how banks are run, the expectations the banking sort of a senior management has on what kind of deliveries they need to make to their shareholders. I mean, if you look at the numbers, since Paris deal was clinched at the end of 2015, almost 6 trillion of bonds and loans have been committed to businesses focusing on hydrocarbons, compared to 3.8 trillion arranged for renewable projects and other climate-friendly ventures, according to this data that has been published. It's basically indicates, tell you that as long as we do one thing with one hand and another one with another one, another thing with another hand, and they are not really consistent in a way how we deploy capital around the world, of course we're going to have a big challenge to reach these targets. And I think banks are becoming much more sensitive to geopolitical situation, including the political one, much more than they would probably be 10 years ago, and that's also one of the reasons why they're trying to play sort of in the middle of a road game, which is not really progressive, but it's not putting them in a much of a risk position going forward. So that will be more or less from my side on that one. But before we end, James, we do this every week, and I think we are trying to capture many of these things that we think are relevant for the audiences out there. And please, if you have anything to add, email us, give us a note on what you think would be relevant, and we will be happy to look at it and try to bring it up in one of our sessions going forward. James, any comments from you?
I've had the wonderful experience this week, which I'll just share briefly because I think it's an upcoming topic which we can keep on our radar in terms of human rights, business and human rights. And I had to put together a video lesson for a professional course talking about communications, business communications and human rights the other day, which was a fascinating thing, trying to give, you know, sort of professionals working in companies guidance and help and steering them on, you know, this huge emerging topic that's just so enormous. So I think one of those things, perhaps a lot of companies are buried in their human rights due diligence processes now, and
Yeah.
they kind of think that that's so trying to think about what it means to real people and the impact of business on humans, on people, not just on the planet, I think is something that I took away that was a very refreshing little exercise that I did that sort of marked out my week from a personal point of view, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with and need to find ways to adapt to. So
Thank you, James. I think it sounds as a fantastic experience that you're sharing with the audience. And if anybody wants to hear more about that, reach out to James, and I'm sure that James will be happy to participate. Thank you very much, all of you, and I wish you a great week.